Hello, and a very warm welcome to the first of our two presentations that the Australian government-funded Water for Women Fund is co-hosting at World Water Week. The first of these sessions is entitled Valuing Inclusive Systems for Stronger Resilience in Water and WASH, a gold standard session. My name is Alison Baker, and I'm the Fund Manager of the Water for Women Fund. I would like to begin today's session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, water, and community. I pay respects to their elders and leaders, past, present, and emerging, as well as to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I would also like to extend my respect to all Indigenous peoples from the lands on wherever you're actually calling in from today. I'm joined by our co-conveners, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, the Water for Women Fund, the Australian Water Partnership, IDE, Plan International, SNV, and WaterAid, all of whom are presenting and talking today. We're also joined by a wonderful set of panelists who will engage in an discussion a little bit later on. Together, we're delighted to be hosting this session and sharing the insights and lessons from some very dedicated teams that have been contributing to the development of inclusive systems around the Asia Pacific. The presenters and panelists will share some very practical solutions that many of you can incorporate into your own work. But before we get started, a couple of housekeeping matters. Firstly, to ensure greater accessibility to the session, we've enabled Zoom's live transcript and closed capture functionality, and you can access this during the CC button on the menu tab. One of the presentations does have captions, so feel free to turn that on and off at your discretion. To avoid any background noise, just a reminder to keep yourselves on mute and off video during the presentations as well. For our panel session a little bit later, we'll look forward to hearing from you and your various questions. So please do add these into the chat box in the Pathable platform as we go, and we'll return to them once we get to the panel. And also towards the end of the session, we'll run a Menti poll. So sometime during the session, you might want to open up Menti, www.menti.com in one of your browsers, or you can also enter it in your phone, and we'll give you a code a little bit later on. So just a couple of questions to get us thinking. As billions are still without water, sanitation, and hygiene, the impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly severe. So how do we ensure everyone in our community has a resilience to adapt and thrive? How do we ensure we have the inclusive systems in place to ensure we leave no one behind? So as we explore these questions, we'll commence the session with a short presentation to set the scene for how we're approaching inclusive systems and the importance of engaging with systems to actually leverage change. This will be followed by 4 different presentations looking at different perspectives, each outlining a different aspect of inclusive water and WASH systems. And then this will be followed by an opportunity for all of us to engage, particularly yourselves, with our panelists through a Q&A session. So get your questions ready. But first, to formally open the session, I'm very pleased to announce Peter O'Connor from the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Peter is DFAT's Director of the Water Security Section within the Climate and Sustainability Division, and he'd like to give his opening remarks for the session. So over to you, Peter.
Hi, my name is Peter O'Connor. I'm the Director of the Water Security Section at the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT. On behalf of DFAT and all of our presenters, I welcome you to this session, Valuing Inclusive Systems for Stronger Resilience in Water and WASH. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I live and work here in Canberra, Australia's national capital. The traditional owners here are the Ngunnawal people. They've lived and worked and cared for the lands and waters of this region for thousands of years before European settlement. The Ngunnawal people live here today as valued members of the community, contributing to the life and prosperity of Australia's national capital. I pay my respects to the Ngunnawal people, to their elders past, present and emerging. The theme of this year's World Water Week is Seeing the Unseen, the value of water. Valuing water also means valuing the systems which rely on it, in particular water sanitation and hygiene systems and water resource management systems. In a world beset by climate change, we must look to building water and WASH systems that are not just accessible, they have to be more resilient than they've ever been before. As Cheryl Hicks, Senior Advisor to Wash for Work says, WASH access alone is no longer enough. WASH resilience is the new goal. The premise of our session today is fairly simple. It is that by being inclusive, by listening to the very diverse voices that make up the communities which use water and wash systems, by including these voices in the design, in the delivery and in the maintenance of our water and wash services, we will not only build more accessible systems, we will have laid the foundations for more resilient systems. Resilient in terms of physical infrastructure, resilient in terms of the institutional systems that regulate and support them, and resilient in terms of the communities that finance and use them. While the premise is simple, as we know, shifting complex and dynamic water and wash systems towards greater equity and resilience is not an easy task. So how can we, as wash and water management programmers, researchers, donors, how can we strengthen the systems in which we work, and by doing so, foster greater equality, inclusion and resilience? Throughout this gold standard session, we will explore how Australia's Development Cooperation Program in the Asia Pacific region supports stronger water and wash systems that seek to benefit all and leave no one behind. During the session, you will hear from our Water for Women and our Australian Water Partnership programs, and from our partners, WaterAid, SNV Bhutan, Yayasan Plan International Indonesia, and IDE Cambodia. We'll also involve the audience in a panel discussion with representatives from the World Bank, the Australian Water Partnership, SNV, and a government agency from Papua New Guinea. The session is designed to be an engaging discussion that explores strategies to strengthen inclusive water and wash systems. I encourage you all to join in the discussion with our presenters and panellists. I'd like to thank the presenters for all of the work they've put into making this session possible. It's truly going to be an interesting session and an informative session. I'd also like to thank the Stockholm International Water Institute for this year's great hybrid event. I look forward to seeing many of you in Stockholm for the in-person conference. I'll now pass you back to Alison, the facilitator for this session. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you so much, Peter, and for really highlighting the importance of inclusion, actively listening to diverse voices and involving them in the decision-making processes. And as you clearly point out, very much serves as a foundation for resilience. So, to set the scene for how we're thinking about inclusive systems, I would like to hand over to Fraser Goff, the Regional Technical Lead System Strengthening from WaterAid Australia. Fraser has been exploring the role of civil society in strengthening systems, including how to make them more inclusive, for over 5 years. And he has willingly shared his experience, but also actively engaged with Water for Women partners, bringing their experience into the discussion to further build that knowledge base and document that in a series of learning briefs so that it can actually be shared more broadly with the sector. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. So over to you, Fraser. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I'd like to set the scene for today's session through posing 3 questions. What are systems for water and wash? Why should we engage with them if we're interested in resilience and inclusion? And how do we engage with them effectively? The lessons I will share today are taken from Water for Women's System Strengthening Learning Agenda initiative, which draws insights from 20 projects delivered by civil society partners across the Asia Pacific region. And we're excited today to extend those lessons to the water resource management sector in our partnership with the Australian Water Partnership. So let's first consider what we mean when we talk about systems for water and wash. There will be as many different definitions of a system as there are participants in our call today. So I'd like you for the next hour to consider a system as a network of people who have an interest in water and wash, and the relationships between those people and with the context around them. Let's make our definition a little more visual. Consider the title photo from today's session. It shows district and community leaders facilitating a discussion about water, sanitation and hygiene in Wallandum community in Wewak, Papua New Guinea. This discussion was part of a process which WaterAid PNG supported to develop the first costed multi-year district wash plan in Papua New Guinea. While the plan itself provides a roadmap for government, civil society, and private sector to coordinate and invest in improving WASH, the starting point and the focus of the plan is what we see in this photo. Diverse actors coming together to understand each other's needs, capacities, and ability to influence the context around them so that they can together ensure everyone has access to WASH services. Why should we consider engaging in systems and networks of people if we're interested in improving inclusion and resilience? Firstly, strategic engagement with systems can leverage systemic change. Influence over decision-making and the ways in which social and cultural norms constrain or perpetuate power imbalances need to be considered at a system level. Considering forms of power, power with, power over, power to, and power within is very relevant to thinking about how we shift systems towards greater equity and collaboration. In today's session, Kencho will share how SNV Bhutan have been engaging with influential leaders and rights groups to challenge the norms about who has influence over WASH decision-making. Secondly, diverse systems are strong systems. Shifting towards greater inclusion and resilience requires collaborations between diverse actors and diversity in voice and agency. Listen for a great example today from Sylvia at Plan Indonesia for how they have been building collaborations between WASH actors and actors from gender equity, disability and social inclusion sectors. Thirdly, diverse systems are resilient systems. Embedding regular sharing among multi-stakeholder forums like water and climate working groups, and including rights-based accountability mechanisms in service provision can help the system to maintain momentum and progress. Kemra from IDE will share today about how strong collaborations between government and private sector in Cambodia are producing more sustainable and resilient sanitation markets. And Lucia from the Australian Water Partnership will share examples of how bringing WASH, water resource management and civil society together is helping strengthen community resilience to climate change in the Pacific. Later in the session, we'll be launching the first learning note from Water for Women's System Strengthening series. Here I will give a high-level summary of some of the recommendations you can look forward to. Firstly, thinking about mindsets and attitudes. In India, CFA have helped change local authorities' assumptions so that they are more open to hearing the wisdom and knowledge of marginalised communities who face WASH challenges and finding solutions together. IRC in Pakistan have helped to build shared vision through strategically engaging with WASH working groups and parliamentarians, which is leading to increased public budget allocations for WASH. World Vision Vanuatu have helped the National Statistics Office to develop capacity to collect and analyse disaggregated sex, age and disability data, which is now becoming standard in Vanuatu's census. The example from Plan in Indonesia you will hear will show how rights group representatives have been entrusted with budgeted tasks within district WASH committees. This involvement is helping to formalise their engagement in the WASH system. And finally, on accountability and evidence-based decision-making, World Vision's project in Bangladesh has built a movement for citizen duty-bearer accountability through the creation and training of citizen voice action working groups and community feedback processes. Excuse me. In summary, by building strategic collaborations among diverse actors, developing capacity, and shifting how power is distributed and influencing attitudes and mindsets, civil society actors can shift water and WASH systems towards greater inclusion and resilience. With that, back to you, Alison.
Thanks so much, Fraser, for setting out the framework for today's session and really actually reminding us that a critical part of any system are the people and the relationships that actually enable it to function. So we're now going to move on to the first of our presenters, Kencho Wangdi, who's the portfolio coordinator in SNV Bhutan. It's been there for quite a number of years and is going to share, as Fraser's highlighted, is going to share some of the benefits of long-term investment in systems change. So over to you, Kencho.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kencho Wangdi from SNV. In this presentation, I will share with you the journey we took in Bhutan to embed inclusive approaches within the national processes of strengthening water and sanitation systems. Since 2010, the government of Bhutan, with partners like SNV, has been embarking on a phased approach in strengthening its sanitation systems and services. As you can see on the map, we worked progressively, moving from district to district, accelerating our area-wide approach along the way, and expanding to all 20 districts by 2021. Engaging in a phased approach helped us to look back, reflect, and adapt our activities as we progressed. The more districts we got exposed to, the more we learned that the goal of 100% access to improved sanitation will not be achieved if we do not take more intentional steps to introduce inclusive approaches in our activities. The graph here provides an overview of the sanitation status of the remaining districts as of June 2022. We started with a baseline of 54% access to improved sanitation. As of June 2022, access was at 94%, with many of the Bhutan's rural toilets looking like the image on the lower side of the slide. The journey was one that took years of work, collaboration, and investments. Although government and SNV's journey started in 2008, as early as 1992, the government of Bhutan issued a royal decree stating the importance for all households to have access to a toilet. Over the years, we tested and improved our approaches to sanitation development. Partnership expanded to include UNICEF and other groups. In a move to demonstrate its leadership and commitment to sanitation, the government of Bhutan endorsed the subsidy-free rural sanitation and hygiene program approach in 2011-12 and the National Rural Sanitation and Hygiene Policy in 2020. This gave the necessary push to reach the remaining 20 districts. In a few months from now, we are expecting to achieve 100% access to improved sanitation. Government leadership and partnerships were key throughout, but embarking on inclusive approaches provided an important foundation for this success to be realized. Our activities were enriched by gender equality and social inclusion and do no harm approaches. In our formative research, in stakeholder meetings, in actual BCC activities, we made sure that all voices and perspectives were represented, heard, and acted upon. We further broadened our partnerships, engaging with not-so-usual suspects in practical research and actual implementation. Women's groups, disability right holders groups, etc. The lessons we learned from ISF, CBM, and right holders organizations, and in consultation with gender works, resulted in development and implementation of female leadership modules, including transformative leadership for people living with disabilities. We also helped set up a broad-based consultation and advisory groups such as the BWASH cluster and the technical working group. BWASH cluster initiates issue discussions, reinforce coordination and collaboration among stakeholders, enhance sharing and learning, reviews and advises on policy recommendations and decisions. To conclude, inclusive approaches are one of the most effective ways to ensure that no one is left behind. Inclusive approaches do not only mean creating space for groups to get their voices heard, but listening, engaging with the perspectives, and bringing this to action. We must go beyond rhetoric. we must formalize broad-based consultation groups. Finally, it is important to keep in mind that realizing inclusive systems, in this case, sanitation for all, cannot be achieved overnight. It takes patience and perseverance. Thank you, and Tashidele.
Thank you so much, Kencho, for summarizing such a sort of a long and rich journey in just a few minutes, but also some very useful advice in terms of changing systems and the need to be patient as well as persistent. I think some very wise words there. We're now going to hear from Lucia Gamara, the Senior Partnerships and Impact Officer from the Australian Water Partnership, who's going to share with us the importance of including local voices and perspectives when designing an early flood warning system. Inclusive systems are important for the water resource systems as well as wash systems. So over to you, Lucia.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I am Lucia Gamarra. I'm the Senior Partnerships and Impact Officer at the Australian Water Partnership, and I will present today a case study on technical support in surface water hydrology focused on flash flood early warning systems. I'm going to be talking to you about how water resource management systems can be strengthened to increase climate resilience and disaster risk reduction. This project is taking place in the Pacific Island countries of Fiji, Samoa, Vanuatu, and Solomon Islands. The Australian Water Partnership works in partnerships. Activities like this are brokered and financed by the AWP and benefit from the knowledge and skills of Australian partners, in this case, Alluvium, BMT, and Jan Edwards. And we also rely heavily on local partners, in this case, the Pacific community. They provide greater understanding in local perspectives, which are critical to achieve success in our projects, to make systems more equitable and build resilience. The overarching aim of the activity is to reduce the impact of climate change on people, and it's a way to help people be more resilient. So what's going on in the Pacific is no surprise to anyone. Pacific Island countries are highly vulnerable and are exposed to flooding and associated landslides due to their relatively short and sometimes steep catchments, lack of protective infrastructure, and frequent exposure to intense rainfall events. Flooding is also associated with cyclones and leads to landslides, along with damage to water supply and other critical infrastructure. Climate change is expected to worsen Pacific flooding challenges as cyclones become more frequent and more intense, and sea level rise increases flood levels. More than 600,000 people from 17 Pacific countries were displaced between 2008 and 2019. And between 2000 and 2019, around 7,300 disaster events resulted in $80 billion economic losses from Oceania. So what are we trying to get with this project? One of our building blocks is capacity development. So increased hydrological capacity applied to early warning systems for flash floods. Another building block is institutional arrangements, increasing the inclusion of diverse voices for the communication components of the early warning system framework. This promotes a shared understanding of the value of flash flood early warnings, as well as a shared understanding of different stakeholders' requirements for communication. The last but not least building block is planning, monitoring, and review. So we are improving hydrological data sets to support decision making. So how are we going about this? We are providing a systematic or standardized way across the region to improve already existing hydrological needs. The project is specific to flash flooding and has a focus on the high volcanic islands with short, steep catchments, which are vulnerable to flash flooding. And people in the area know that, but it's that systematic and standardized approach which we are supporting with building on existing capacities. We're also engaging with national hydrological services and with civil society organizations. So we're trying to reach informal institutional arrangement, not just the formal ones. We want to give voice and representation, be participatory, and have country-led coordination mechanisms lead the way. Taking a participatory approach and building on existing systems and strengths provides a greater understanding on local perspectives, which creates lasting success for water resource management projects. Finally, developing and documenting processes to use open source data to inform catchment understanding is a way that we are improving the building block of monitoring and review. This is an example of a very recent engagement activity, the National Flood Early Warning System Stakeholder Workshop, where stakeholders got together to discuss strategic development of an upscale program of support for building surface water hydrological capacity and address flash flooding and other hydrological needs in the Pacific. So what can you do about it? What does this all mean? My call to action to you is, have you ever thought about the climate risks in your town, in your neighborhood? Do you know what the impacts are? Do you know what you could do to reduce that risk? What does your water resource system look like? And what are the risks 50 years from now? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucia, sharing the reality of many in the Pacific, but even more importantly, what kind of things can actually be done to manage those, and I suppose just sort of really reinforcing the importance of building on that local knowledge when you're developing flood management systems. So that was just sort of a highlight for me as I listened to that presentation. So from the impacts of climate change in the Pacific, which is also sort of being felt much more broadly, we're now going to Indonesia to hear from Sylvia Landa for Yayasan Plan International, Indonesia. Sylvia is the project manager for the Water for Women project WASH and Beyond, Transforming Lives in Eastern Indonesia. She's going to outline the importance of advocating governments for additional budgets for WASH, and we look forward to your insight, Sylvia. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Sylvia Landa from Plan Indonesia. Would like to share about our experience in ensuring WASH-JESI's sustainability in the project areas where we work. What I meant as WASH-JESI is water sanitation and hygiene with greater emphasis to gender equality and social inclusion. The main barriers or challenges for WASH-JESI issue sustainability in our project areas are low investment from different sources of government budget for WASH-JESI because of many competing budget priorities in the district. This is really real during COVID-19 pandemic, where although WASH is important for COVID prevention, but many stakeholders prefer cash transfers for economic relief. And second, there is no guarantee of sustainable investment towards WASH-JESI after the project. So we need to making sure that this issue will be addressed. Later is low understanding of importance of WASH-JESI from decision makers, where in the beginning of the project, many decision makers still believe that WASH is just a need, not right for everyone. And also it's really real that low participation of marginalized group in WASH decision making. However, through the project, we've able to increase budget allocation from different budget sources, such as from Village Fund, District Fund, and National Fund. And we recorded from 2019 to 2022 that the total WASH budget has reached more than 2.7 million Australian dollars. This number includes budget for water infrastructure, inclusive toilets, waste-related infrastructure, behavior change activity, and also operational budget for WASH-JESI team in the village. And now WASH-JESI is secure in the district midterm planning, which is a district regulation. And we've also increased participation of marginalized group in the decision making, where disability people organization and also women organization are now officially part of the WASH working group in the district. And there's also a better understanding about what's JESI by the decision makers, where now they think that they believe that WAS is rights for everyone, that everyone need to be supported. So how we achieve those uh, impacts? First, we need to be opportunistic to get benefit from existing government budget procedure, because it's difficult to create new budget channel. We need to advocate for the national level regulation. So what we mapped different budget sources in the district and the needed regulation to support the budget regulation. For example, if we want village fund to support was JESI, then we need regions regulation specifically mention was JESI as the important issue. And if we want national fund to support was JESI in the district, we need to list activities related to was JESI in the district sanitation strategy. And we also need to ensure funding sustainability, because for example, the project will end this year, but by integrating was JESI in the district midterm planning, we now sure that at least until 2026, that was JESI is prioritized by the district. Because leaders change, regulation can be changed, there is still uncertainty in budget sustainability. We also need to invest in people and in the system and parts of the component of the system, for example, the stakeholders and also women's and disability groups. So we increase their capacity for the champions, and we also increase the agency of marginalized group and creating more opportunities for disability people organization and women organization to advocate for their own rights. And we also need to leverage power width, because by working together, the aim for better sustainability of WAS JESI in the district can be achieved. For example, in the annual budget advocacy meeting, there is collaboration between DPOs and women organization to have public hearings and meeting with the regions and a House of Representatives to ensure political commitment. And also having WAS JESI champion from the WAS working group to oversee the regulation process and budget allocation, ensure that the political commitment is translated into budget and also regulation. So we believe by leveraging power width, this will accelerate the sustainability of WAS JESI in the district. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And I love that pragmatism of needing to be opportunistic and creative when we are seeking additional government funds, and as we all work together to increase WASH as well as be more inclusive as we do that. So thank you again. So finally, we move back to Cambodia, where we will hear from Rana Abdel Sattar, the WASH Innovation and Partnership Manager with IDE Cambodia, and Kemra Ross, their National Public-Private Partnership Manager, who will sort of move us not so much government systems, but looking at more sort of sanitation marketing systems. So over to you, Rana and Kemra.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rana Abdel Sattar, and with me today is Kemra Ross. We're both from IDE Cambodia, and today we'll be talking about how an inclusive sanitation market system at its core can enable system strengthening. IDE conceives its sanitation marketing implementation strategy as 3 sweeps. In the first 2 sweeps, you're targeting early adopters in the majority. The aim is to achieve maximum efficiency of resource allocation by first targeting those who are most willing and able to purchase a toilet. By the end of the second and the third sweep, now you're targeting the more marginalized populations. It's the late majority and laggard households that are still without the latrine. Throughout this entire market sanitation scale-up process, for it to be successful and contextual, you'd want to adopt a human-centered design, which is a participatory approach that allows you to work with the community to develop affordable, desirable, and scalable products, as well as adopting an evidence-based approach, which means collecting data continuously in order to identify underlying market challenges and make sure you overcome them and target them to achieve lasting and inclusive change. Once the market is mature and at scale, you can accelerate your reach to the most vulnerable populations using inclusive financial mechanisms. One of the most successful examples here in rural Cambodia is the targeted subsidy. Between 2019 and 2021, we were able to reach almost 39,000 low-income households who were able to purchase a toilet at a discounted rate. IDE is now pushing the limits of trying to adapt these targeted subsidies to include an account for climate vulnerability, gender, disability, ethnic minority, in addition to poverty. Another successful financial mechanisms are payment installment plans. Almost 2,300 cash-restrained households were able to pay for their products over multiple installments without interest accruing. 45% of those customers were low-income households. Now, Kemra will take it over to talk about system strengthening approaches to the private and public sector within the sanitation market system.
For sanitation marketing, we work closely with over 70 business, and we provide training, technical training, like manufacture, installation, and deliver the product to the customer. And we also to provide business marketing and planning training to the business to make sure that they are run successful business to fulfill the customer needs. In addition, we also to provide the connect business with local authority training to refer household when the customer need to buy the work product. Like in the picture, we also conduct a gender sensitive training to the all business that we are working with to increase the gender equality in the sanitation business. We created public-private partnership. As a result of the creation, we achieved over 1,700 village open education free in 6 provinces that we are working. And we also provide capacity building to village and commune authority over 2,400. With this amount, 46% are women local authority that we train and coach. With the amount, we also to provide capacity building on behavior change training, which to make sure that they are communicate with the non-Latin owner and persuade them to purchase Latins. For the household that cannot, poorest household that cannot afford to purchase Latin, we provide increased social fund training in the fundraising to make sure that to have the poorest household. When the village become the ODF, we provide the ODF claim training and form training to make sure that they are alignment with the national guideline of the Cambodia government. When the commune become with the ODS, we also to provide the post-ODF claim training, which include with the 3 sessions that focus on ODS sustainability, hand washing, child facing management, and menstrual hygiene management.
To wrap up, by first creating an inclusive sanitation market system that can reach scale, then offering additional resources to reach the most marginalized, and aligning with government priorities through public-private partnerships, you can accomplish system strengthening and a sustainable impact. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you to Kemra and Rana. Thank you at the end there for really summarizing that important role that sanitation marketing in the private sector has in terms of inclusive WASH as well. So that sort of ends our presentation part of it. So a big thank you again to Rana, Kemra, Sylvia, Lucia, Kencho, and Fraser for kicking us off. I think it was a really rich set of sort of presentations and lots of really great examples in there in terms of the importance of valuing inclusive systems. And yeah, given some really, really grounded examples. We are going to move on to our panel, but if you do have any particular questions about the presentations, please feel free to actually put them in the chat, and we have people online that will come back and respond to those. If we run out of time in terms of those questions, we will get back to you over the next couple of days. Feel free to reach out to those individuals themselves, or send an email into the Water for Women email that I'll get someone to put in the chat as well, and we will get back to you answering those questions. But through this panel discussion, I think we'll also be continuing to build on a lot of the ideas and themes that have come up through those presentations. So now moving on to our panel, and if our various panelists can actually come on screen, that would be fantastic, and I will introduce you. We do have Winnie Segu, and I'll come back shortly and introduce her, but Winnie's joining us from rural Papua New Guinea, so some of the bandwidth isn't so great, so we're hoping she definitely has sound. We're hoping she has photographs and be able to join us, but you'll be able to hear her. So if we can also have Virak and Amy come on camera as well. But I'll kick off. Catherine's here first, so I'll kick off introducing Catherine. So Catherine Cross from the Australian Water Partnerships. Catherine has recently joined AWP as a strategic and partnerships lead, moved from the warm and balmy Bangkok to the cold Canberra. So she's readjusting. She's got very extensive experience over 15 years in the water sector, from sort of global scale down to local scale, with a background in water resources and environmental management. Has worked in Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, and South America with NGOs, government, and the private sector. So she'll bring a rich sort of set of experiences with her, in particular in the water resources sector, but I know she crosses over into the water sector as well. We got Virak Chan from the World Bank, based in Cambodia. He's a water resource management specialist with the World Bank's Water Global practice. Over 10 years of experience in water supply and sanitation and water resource management in the Mekong. And he's currently team leader for 2 projects, including the Mekong Integrated Water Resource Management Project and the Cambodia Water Security Improvements Project. But on the side, he's also a very busy man, is also a founder of the Center for Sustainable Water, which is a nonprofit organization building capacity of the new generation of Cambodian water leaders, contributing to sustainable water management and looking at very innovative ways to do that. So you can bring a range of different perspectives to this discussion for sure. Amy Reza works for SNV, Nepal, and Bhutan. She's currently the country director for Nepal and Bhutan. A gender and impact expert with over 10 years experience. Amy very much brings a raft of experience working with development agencies across Asia and Africa. She's worked across gender and social inclusion approaches, tools and strategies, women's economic empowerment, socioeconomic and environmental impact research, agri-market development and value chains, as well as inclusive infrastructure financing investment. And I think from the breadth of experience she has, probably her real commitment, I think, really comes out in that in terms of encouraging those in the WASH sector to broaden the scope of work and really seek to find ways to bring in different sectors, but in particular to rearrange gender norms at home, because that has such a strong influence on everything else that happens. So we look forward to hearing from Amy shortly. And finally, we've got Winnie Segu from ESEPIC in Papua New Guinea. She's the Environment Health Officer for the ESEPIC Provincial Health Authority in Wewak. And she brings a background in environmental health, public health and governance, and public policy. She's currently the coordinating the Water for Women project in Wewak District in East Sepik Province on behalf of the Wewak District Development Authority, and working in partnership with WaterAid PNG. So really brings that sort of local government sort of perspective to everything. So I'm hoping that as we've gone through that, you've put your questions in the chat. But what I might do, so we've got a question here. So I'm not quite sure who to direct that to. Anyway, so Helvi, is asked, if the sanitation will increase, will you notice less enteric diseases? I'm not quite sure if anybody's, that's a very specific kind of question. I might leave that one floating a minute in case if anybody feels they can answer that, that's great. If not, we'll actually come back and answer that question a little bit later through the chat. If there's no other questions, I'm giving you a little bit more time to think about everything that you've heard, as well as what these various individuals actually bring to the discussion today. I might just sort of kick off with a question to Catherine, and others feel free to add in. We've gone through the presentations today, and I think a really strong theme that sort of came through was requiring that the need for requiring a real multi-stakeholder approach. Lucia gave a really good example of that, as have others. But if we look at sort of the water sector and looking at the systems actors, how have you gone about sort of forming some of those partnership and alliances in support of stronger water systems? And are you seeing the difference that actually makes in outcomes? So over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Alison. And thanks for the question. Yeah, so the process of strengthening systems is an opportunity to establish partnerships and alliances which empower women and tackle gender inequality, address disability, and broader social inclusion. And they can also be an opportunity to consider growing issues such as climate change. So as Lucia mentioned, AWP brokers partnerships to address some of these issues, including climate, water, and development challenges. And we see partnerships going beyond technical information, but as you mentioned earlier, that we also have to think about the people and the relationships, how to build trust and reciprocity, and create an environment for ongoing exchange where partners are learning from each other. So it's really a two-way interaction to help shape actions into the future. So complex problems such as addressing climate change through water management, which is also GEDSI sensitive, requires, again, not just technical solutions, but need people from different backgrounds to work together to come up with collaborative, innovative, and adaptive approaches. So as Lucia mentioned, the example that she gave from the Pacific, there is a need to be inclusive to better integrate local perspectives as part of improved flood early warning systems. And a well-designed partnership will look for key actors that can bring these perspectives forwards. Just a couple of other quick examples that AWP is supporting. We're supporting WaterAid, for example, in Cambodia, and Timor-Leste in integrating water resource management, water sanitation, hygiene, and as well as gender equity, disability, and social inclusion. And in both countries, the aim is to strengthen inclusive governance arrangements and increase capacity for actually putting water resource management planning and programming into practice. And a key element of this is working across scales, so including national and subnational government authorities, as well as, in the case of Cambodia, district WASH committees. In the case of Timor-Leste, there's inclusion of different women's groups and disability organizations, as well as those with community development expertise. So it's a first step. Bringing these organizations together is the first step in fostering partnership, and then the long-term investment, and that can take this forward. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. And I might just build on that a little bit more. I know, Virak, you've had some of that experience as well in terms of bringing people together and the need to bring them together to really sort of unpack a lot of these issues. But I might just sort of adding to that a little bit, something that I know is close to all of us, and as we really try and build these inclusive systems, it does require sort of additional financing as well. So maybe if you could kind of bring in some of that the importance of, and Sylvia really built on that as well, the importance of bringing different stakeholders together to really build on that financing side of things as well. But again, how do you actually do that? How challenging is it?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alison. I think I'm trying to build on what Catherine said earlier as well. It's very important to start by having all the stakeholders and also the government counterpart to understand what has been done in the past, what is the current challenges, and what is the forward look challenges that everyone going to address. Catherine also mentioned about climate change, but I would add a little bit more. Rather than climate change, we have to also look forward into the population growth, food security, economic recession. All of this stuff also need to be factored in all the issue regarding to water and water supply services and sanitation services as well, that the people is waiting for to improve their lives, improve the economy, and also improve the development of the country and so on. The main challenge that I observe in the past, if you're talking about water resource itself, there's a lot of thinkings around that. Water resource and is really for supporting agriculture, right? So a lot of people talking a lot in terms of how much water that could be available, irrigated to farms, to different crops, right? And then regarding to the service on the water supply and sanitation, so far we just quite reluctant in the last 10 years because there's plenty of water. Most of the water operator, they can access to water by themselves, and they select only the low-hanging fruit in terms of the water source that they can extract, and then they can supply, or even the community can access to any water that would be available. But the current situation has been changed because there's a lot of incident on the water scarcity that happened in many places. For example, across Cambodia, in the last 5 years, we never see a low density of rainfall. We never see the low flow of the river upstream and downstream. We rarely see also the challenge in terms of prolonged drought in the dry season. So these phenomenons keep alerting us, right? What is right now is the current challenges and the issues in regarding to water availability, but at the same time, water services. So coming into this stage, when the water resource and the water supply, even stakeholder and the government line agency never talk together. So this is something that we should alert that the linkage between water resource and water supply and sanitation need to be part of the table, the topic on the table to discuss among all of those stakeholders. As my experience, I was also working in the water supply and sanitation for almost 10 years. I'm just shifted myself to become a water resource specialist. So when I was a water supplies and sanitation person, I rarely talk about water resource. I never talk about water scarcity issues, right? But when I can become the water resource person, I look back what's happening in the past and what was my thinking before. I found that there's a lot of things that we can really bring along with all the stakeholders who now living in a different world to come into one world and discuss about those challenges. So my example in Cambodia, we hosted my colleague and I hosted the Cambodia Water Dialogue, bringing all the different stakeholders, water supply and sanitation, stakeholder engaging in agricultures, stakeholder engaging in environments, sectors to come together and then discuss the major issues around this impact from climate change, the more demand in terms of the water from different sector, agriculture, water supply and sanitation, and environment as well. So when we put those people in the room, they finally discuss, but they just realized that they didn't know that they have a different group of people working on different things, right? So to me, I think there's a number of steps in order to engage those stakeholders to talk together. Number one, give them, the holistic education in terms of the issues, in terms of the issue that would happen in the past, the issue that currently happen, but also the issue that they have to look into the future as well. So the Cambodia Water Dialogue platform really open eyes to all the stakeholders, especially Ministry of Economic and Finance, to look at the different way of the thinking. And then at the end of the workshop, everyone just on board that working through the think all approach was not really working anymore, because they requires collective funding, collective mobilization of resources, collective effort, including the technical, and as Katrin said, is also a mindset and leadership together. So the key takeaway from the discussion is we need to really focus more on holistic approach when we do the program, but at the same time find way how we could integrate from the different aspect of the water supplies, from the demand side, from the supply side of the water, and also from the demand side as well. So demand side here, we are talking about who are water users. So it's not about agriculture, but it's also water user from the water supplies perspective, and also sanitation perspective as well. And the COVID outbreak, you know that it's alerted us so much that water availability is very important. We're trying to promote hand washing with soap, but then we look into in many areas, especially vulnerable group or community, they could not access to water. So how could the hand washing promotion could happen to mitigate the risk of the COVID infections? So this is something that, again, it tells us that it's now time to work together. It's now time to put the resource together as well. I stop here, but
okay. Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of different points in that, but yeah, I agree. I think there's, as Catherine has said, and all the presenters have said, is that the climate change, the water security, all of those different things coming together, but all the different stakeholders that we need to have around the table to really find those solutions. And I'd like to just move to Winnie a minute. There's a question in the chat. I'll move to that in a second. But Winnie, just building again on what sort of Catherine and Vierak said, that multi-stakeholder approach, needing to bring water security and water resources thinking into delivering WASH. What are some of the experiences that you've had in rural Papua New Guinea? What kind of capacity have you had to actually been involved both institutionally and individually to build the systems, one, to be more inclusive, but also to look at those different aspects of water? Maybe you can share some of your experiences on that. And unfortunately, we don't have Winnie on camera, but we'll hear her voice, I hope.
Thank you, Alison. Can you hear me?
We can. It's perfectly.
Thank you very much. Building on from Catherine and Vierak about capacity building and system strengthening in Wewak District, in ECP province, Papua New Guinea, where Water for Women project is currently being implemented here. As Catherine rightfully said, bringing in stakeholders and partners, government agencies to collaboratively coordinate and implement WASH is very important in capacity building and system strengthening. For Wewak District, initially we identified and bring everyone together, especially those ones who are involved in WASH activities. That's way back in 2018 when the inception of the program. We bring those stakeholders and partners together, government agencies from the province to the district and local level government, and with the rights group inclusion, that's ECP Council of Women and the ECP Disabled People Organization into the group, because we want to be inclusive in WASH and the gender-related issues. So we formed the Wewak District WASH Coordination Body, chaired by the district administrator, who is the chairman of the committee, and co-chaired by PHA, where I am representing the Provincial Health Authority and coordinating the program. So we had those partners, and then we shared resources, identify our strengths and weaknesses, we collaboratively implement WASH by formulating our 5-year district WASH plan. And then now we're into the implementation. Just to give some example of WASH systems strengthening and capacity building, so far with the inclusion of JETC and disabled people organization, our JETC team here, they are able to train local council of women and other women in the community to be trainers of LT Island concept, where they train the local women on the importance of WASH and hygiene practices. And now we are into soap making. Our team are training the women in the community to make soap in order to minimize infections and also create opportunity for them to sell their soap, like generate revenue for them as well. So that's through JETC inclusion. And with Provincial Health Authority, where we usually traditionally implement WASH with the current system strengthening and capacity building through the Water for Women project, where Water Aid is supporting us. We are able to use mWater as a database for our for tracking and monitoring WASH in the province, and especially WASH in healthcare facilities as the custodians. So we're able to use the database, that app, to collect data and monitor WASH systems and WASH services in our healthcare facilities, as well as supporting our province also with the provincial database and WASH. And also with our offices now, health offices can be able to do water testing, test of E. coli for the water quality. So that's through system strengthening and capacity building. As PHA, we feel that after Water for Women project ends, we are able to take on this program and sustain it in the future, working closely with our other partners. Yeah, thank you. I think
Right.
this is all I have to say.
Thank you, Winnie.
Question, I can be able to elaborate further. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. No, that was great. And there was lots of great examples of the work that you can actually do with whether it's a women's group and really expanding past that, just looking at actually at the WASH itself. So I'm going to actually switch over to Amy and ask her a question, because I know that's an area that she loves to really build on all the different aspects that actually WASH can touch, looking at the gender aspect of things. But I thought we've had some great examples from Winnie in terms of the ways that you can actually build inclusion in a Papua New Guinea context. Maybe Amy, you could expand on the experiences that you've had in Bhutan and Nepal, particularly with disability organizations. How have you really built their inclusion into the national and subnational WASH systems? Because I know you've done some great work there. So maybe you could share some of those effective strategies so we get that geographic coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alison. Wonderful examples there from another part of the world. I think kind of the starting point is inclusion doesn't just strengthen systems for WASH. I think if you don't have inclusion, you could argue that the system isn't strong enough to cover all of the community that it's supposed to serve. So it's actually integral to the design of any WASH systems. Kind of 2 points really. If you look at local governance practices that we've tried to promote in Nepal and Bhutan, we're really pushing inclusive subnational WASH structures. So for example, inclusive coordination committees, where we see representation and participation from different groups, for example, disability rights organizations and other marginalized groups. That's the starting point, really. We are also trying to move beyond just participation, because in many instances we see participation, we create the inclusive local governance structures, but how do they really translate into positive WASH outcomes for those communities and people with different WASH needs? And our experience tells us that we have to think more broadly around participation and move into things like empowerment, realization of rights, and creating networks at local level. A few examples of how we do that in Bhutan: we have leadership training, local leadership training, which looks at working with different groups and influential leaders, rights organizations, and really promoting leadership, which exercises voice and pushes the needs of different communities and groups. And in Nepal, for example, we work on female entrepreneurship, where they're WASH entrepreneurs and they're able to become female leaders in their community and promote the needs that they require around menstrual health, for example. So really, we're looking at that translation of participation into positive WASH outcomes, and there's lots of things that we need to do, and we need to look at it holistically in a way. The second area I'd like to zoom in is at the household level. So we see lots of improvements in formal WASH systems, but they engage with the informal systems, for example, at household level, where we see huge disparities between access, prioritization, and spending between, for example, men and women, those living with disability. So what we need to do is understand those interactions at household level. In Nepal and Bhutan, we've worked with the fund on the GEM survey, which has given us incredible depth of knowledge on how these social norms and power structures for WASH outcomes engage at household level, and how we can work to shift those in a way that's progressive, but also do no harm as well. We have to be very conscious of that when we're working at household level. So those two different spheres, you've got the formal local governance, inclusion, beyond participation approach, and then really zooming in at social norms, power structures within the household, and how they translate to positive WASH outcomes. Thanks, Alison.
Great, thanks, Amy. And I'm going to build on that. There's a question. So great examples of what you can do with those diverse stakeholders. But the question in the chat, and we probably need a lot longer than the few minutes we have left to explore this, but that tension between water being a public good, and when you bring all these different stakeholders in, is there potential for a sort of exploitation by some of those different stakeholders and civil society and some of those groups? So that's sort of one side of one side of it, when you get those groups coming in together. And then there's also that other side in terms of the monetary value of water as well. And I think what the question is really kind of exploring is, how do we get people to really value water? Yes, there is a cost to water, but how can we really get people to value water without that disruption of the financial side of things that comes in? Varric, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think as we all understand that water has a value and water should be priced, right? But importantly, as I said, the previous practice, it's really based on some country, right? Some country is the water scarce country. Some country is the water abundant country. Like for the case of Cambodia, we consider ourselves as a water abundant country, but we just lack of the management of those water. I think the important things that to start with in order to price the water, most important is to understand the water as well, right? So where does the water come from, and how can you really build a facility to manage the water? Because you cannot really price the water when the water become an open water, so that the people everyone can access. There's no management, there's no administrations, right? Number one, this need to be building more on understanding the value of water, and the people is really need to see that the water is not sustainable. It's not infinite resources. It's limited resources. This is number one. Number two, I think in order to price the water, you need to have a proper regulations, right? The regulations on the water allocation, pricing, and licensing. So you have to ensure that who are the water users, as I repeated earlier, that that extract the water and access to the water in what amounts of water that they extracted for, right? For example, for the case of agriculture, who consumes a lot of water, I could see from the chat
so
box.
Some questions, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's the questions in regarding to that. And you know that there's many small farm holder or some small farmer who use a little water to just irrigate their crops or cash crop whatsoever. But at the same time, there's a huge investor on agriculture who consumes a lot of water as well. But then the water is still free. The water is still become a public good. And why it is like that? Because there's no any regulations that enforce to those main water or big water users to provide or to pay the tariff of those water when they extract the water to irrigate, for example, the banana farm of 1,000 hectares or 500 hectares and so. So the regulation on water allocations, licensing, and pricing and tariffs is super important to be as a guidance, right?
Yeah.
Number three, it is very important to really see the value of water when, for example, for the case of water supply, I'm talking about a water supply operator or water supply utilities. So when they extract the water from the water source, they treat the water, they distribute the water, and then they charge the tariff from the household, right? So what is the tariff values in there? So normally they charge the tariff value only the treatment cost only, right? The treatment and service cost only. So normally they don't charge or include the cost of the water source in the tariff. So this is something that we need to consider of taking the whole step or the whole pathway to price the water, not just only for agriculture, but for others, water user and who benefiting from water. But at the same time, there must be some exceptional as well, right? Because some water that accessed by household, very small amount for animal washing and so on. That is also a public goods. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I know we have to wrap up in a couple of minutes, and Virak's brought out sort of a lot of the water pricing when you look at utilities and how you actually price that. Amy, Winnie, Catherine, any sort of final comments from you in terms of shifts you've seen in terms of valuing water at a household or community level, just to bring that side of the equation in into the conversation as well as we start to wrap up?
Maybe I can just make 2 quick points. I guess, like one of the things that we need to consider is looking, as was mentioned, looking at the whole system and how, how investment in one area may impact another. So if we invest in agroforestry, for example, we need to actually look at what are the native species and how bringing in non-native species might affect the whole system in terms of runoff and so on. We should also look at referring, the second point is we should also look at referring to local, traditional and indigenous knowledge and sustainable water practices that have been in place and developed over generations. And also how they are integrating nature and nature-based solutions into these processes as well.
Great, thank you. Amy or Winnie, anything you want to add to that? I think this conversation is getting bigger and bigger, and we're just going to start, but it'll be an ongoing one, I'm sure. Over to you, Amy.
Very quick one from me, but exactly building on what Catherine said. I would say really listen to what different people in the areas that you are working are saying to you, and be really conscious that some people's voices are not heard, but they may really hold so much knowledge around coping and vulnerability, specifically relating to climate change. And so I think sometimes we can be very technical, but for example, in the mid-hills of Nepal, communities have been living and coping there for as long as time. So we should really be listening actively to what they're telling us.
Great point. And any final points from you, Winnie?
Thank you. With community participation is very important. Prior to WASH project construction, we have to get their views, and with the being mindful of climate change, we have to listen attentively to the communities on the types of water sources that are available, and the communities has to agree on the water source that is convenient and accessible to them. So what we usually do here is we get a view through social mobilization, community participation, before going in there to the actual construction begins.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to all our 4 panelists. Thank you to those people that have put questions into the chat that we've kind of been building on. I think that real importance of inclusion, but you start with those kind of conversations, but then sort of how quickly it goes to water resources, climate change, agriculture, the sector, everything is so interconnected. And I think that real point in terms of listening to local voices, but having that big picture kind of view and bringing the different perspectives together is really so important as we move forward. So I feel we've just started this conversation. Let's keep it going, but we do have to stop and move on in this sort of short space of time that we actually have together. But I look forward to the ongoing discussions we have through World Water Week and beyond, as we're really trying to achieve SDG 6, but it really bring all those different sectors together to find solutions that work for everybody, in particularly in a very changing climate. So many of the things we've actually touched on have really been consolidated. My next job, I'll change tact a little bit. We're going to launch a briefing note that touches on a whole range of different things that we've touched on today, but really summarizes the experience of the Water for Women Fund in particular and all the different partners in terms of building those stronger systems for inclusive, sustainable wash. Practically, how do we do that? And drawing on many of the points that both our presenters and our panelists have actually drawn in today, working at all the different sort of levels of government. We're really proud of this particular learning brief that we're launching today. It's called Engaging with the People and Actors Within Wash Systems. And I think we've really heard today the importance of the people and the organizations and all the interrelationships in terms of how they work. And that's not just the water and wash sector, but as we've seen today, is taken out much more broadly. So I'd like to launch this particular learning brief. It's one of 3 that the Water for Women Fund has actually been working on. So stay tuned for the other 2 that will follow briefly. There's lots of great insights into it. I think when we're dealing with problems that are actually so big, it's really important to kind of ground them in real life examples that you can actually take forward. So have a read of it, enjoy it. If there are any other questions that have come through, we will come back and endeavor to answer those. But just as we kind of finish up, I'd really like everybody to reflect on what they've heard today through the presentations and the panel discussion, and think about what you can actually, what's resonated with you, what's an action that you can actually take back to your organization, wherever you're working, whether that's at national, it doesn't matter where we're all working, but together we need to find these solutions. So we're going to put up a Menti, and if you can start think about that. The question is, what's one thing that you'll do differently after today's session to further strengthen the inclusive water and wash system in which you work? The code in your Menti is 2173-3531. So yeah, please feel free to think about that. What is that one thing that you're going to take from today? And while you're putting those things, I'll sort of provide sort of a few sort of closing remarks, and then we'll come back in a minute and look at some of your responses, because that's what's most important. What do we do next? So I think we've heard today, and the panel definitely brought that out. Water and wash systems are complex, but what's really important is within that complexity, what can we actually do? What are those actions that we can actually take? And we've heard a lot of practical ideas today that you can take and adapt to your sort of different contexts. So we encourage all of you to think about what you've heard today as is coming up. This is whole richness already. I'm trying to, as we see, but but yeah, it's how we take things forward. Have a look at the learning brief. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email the Water for Women address, or which has now gone up in the chat, or any of the attendees that have been involved today. I think what's really clear to all of us is we'll only actually be able to solve so many of these issues if we do actually work together, bringing those different perspectives into the room and then working through the different solutions to them. So I'd really like to thank our presenters and our panelists for sharing all the experiences that you've had over a period of time. All those involved in actually putting the learning brief together so that we can actually share that more broadly. We see that something is that the Water for Women Fund is able to share, but we see that as a work in progress. We're going to continually be building on that and really building those inclusive systems that we really value, and value those various diverse perspectives. So sort of in closing, thank you very much to everybody. Good luck with all the things that you actually are going to be doing to develop those inclusive systems. We're going to be doing a little bit of a sort of deeper dive into changing invisible norms within the WASH sector a little bit later on this evening. That session is called Changing Invisible Norms, the Key to Inclusive Water and WASH. So some of the things that we touched briefly on today, we're going to expand in a little bit more detail a bit later on. So thank you again, everybody, for coming and joining us. Thank you for all of the Menti will actually load a lot of your responses onto the system, so you can go back and have a look at those. I'm not even going to try and summarize everything that's there, but thank you for your participation today. And again, thank you to our presenters and our panelists for sharing their experiences. So good luck, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. Thank you.